Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, I want to begin first with a few questions I've been getting lately, and that is just to provide an update on what is going on over in China. It's very difficult, I think, to get accurate, up-to-date news on the flooding situation here, but this was a video that I saw in several different locations over the last couple of weeks, just showing us what the Three Gorges Dam looks like as they've let a lot of this water out. So to understand how much precipitation we've seen in this area, I've been working on a new set of graphics, and this is what we've got here. I just updated this with the latest data, and from June 1st through August 5th, using the GPM, that's the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission, which is a part of NASA. This is the iMerge product. What I did was I went and I looked back from June 1st to August 5th at total satellite estimated rainfall. And you can see here as you look at this particular part of China, and I've got the rivers overlaid here, how much precipitation has really fallen on parts of the river system that eventually feeds into the Yangtze River and then through the delta there at Shanghai. Now, the Three Gorges Dam, I've labeled its location so you can understand where it is with respect to some of the heaviest rainfall, but there have been pockets here that have exceeded 60 inches of rainfall estimated from satellite during that time period. So we have flooding both upstream and downstream, and the problem is that over the next 10 days, operational models are continuing to put down quite a bit of precipitation on the northern edge of this watershed. So again, we talk about the delta being right over here and the river coming back into this area. So you can see that on the rivers that drain into it from the north and also from the west, we're clearly going to be adding quite a bit more precipitation to this. So this situation is one that we need to watch carefully. As you probably heard from a lot of news reports, there's something like 500 million people in the floodplain of this river. And should we see more levee failures, or should the worst happen, which would be a catastrophic failure of some of the large dam systems, including the Three Gorges Dam, we would see a massive humanitarian problem here, of course, but a loss of a lot of farmland. So let's just keep an eye on this as we progress forward, but I wanted to provide that update with some of the satellite data I've been working on over the last couple of days. Now here's the other kind of big thing I want to start off the video with. We had released yesterday the new long-range outlooks from the European model. And the first map we're going to look at here shows September, October, November sea surface temperature anomalies. And I was curious to see how the model is going to continue to treat the La Nina that it's been trying to develop for quite some time. We still see warmth across much of the main development region for hurricanes over in the Atlantic and much of the Atlantic up against the east coast of the United States. We still see the very warm conditions that are here in the North Pacific. But the models continue to want to show this La Nina developing as we work our way into fall. And we just need to talk about what the modeling consequences of that are. So when we think about the tropics first over in the Atlantic, it's interesting to see that the September, October, November atmospheric pressure anomalies, sea level pressure anomalies, want to continue to keep the center of the ridge way out here into the central Atlantic and not pushing it over toward the United States. So this would be favorable for a tropical cyclone track, kind of like what we saw with Isaias coming around off of Africa and just curling around this larger high. We can see that the models are still keeping this whole sector very wet, which means that it's actively producing quite a bit of tropical convection, suggesting that we're going to keep the season really alive and well and moving with more active tropical cyclones. From there, let's go back to the United States and just take a look at what its seasonal projections are for September, October, November. Again, that's a time period, September, October, November, in terms of temperature and precipitation. We see that for much of the United States and Canadian prairies, the models are wanting to still keep the jet stream pretty far to the north. So we see above average temperatures compared to the climatological average, although you do kind of center out the midsection of the country there with closer to average. But I was really keying in on this precipitation pattern because we see things wet in through this area and a broad sector in through here that's dry, yet active tropical cyclones here along the east coast. When I started to look at this and think about what's going on with that La Nina, I just ran a quick correlation here looking at September, October, November precipitation rates with Nina region 3.4. So that's Central Pacific Ocean temperatures. So here's the way to look at this. Whenever we see warmth in here or an El Nino, we tend to be dry in the Pacific Northwest for September, October, November, and then wet in through this corridor. So we would then take the opposite of that for La Nina. So in other words, wherever you see those warmer colors, this would indicate a drier pattern here and wetter in the Pacific Northwest. So it seems to be that the models, when we look longer term, are really honing in on that ocean temperature pattern as the main forecast guidance moving forward, maybe missing some more, of course, short-term subtle features. Something else to notice, do see how this region in through here shows up on the negative correlation. So that would mean during La Nina, we'd expect it to be wetter than average in through here, hence our more active tropical cyclone season that we've been watching carefully. This is making a bit of sense, though. We've noticed that over the last about a month or so, the Southern Oscillation Index has come up toward positive values. Remember, you have to get up in the positive values to be in La Nina-like behavior in the atmosphere. And we've talked about this yesterday in the long range, but the trade winds have been getting stronger. In other words, we're seeing stronger trade winds, which are characteristic of a La Nina. So it appears that this La Nina may have a bit of life as we go into our fall time period, and I think we need to keep a close eye on this moving forward. The latest European plots, or the plumes for sea surface temperature anomalies, are not yet released. At least I didn't have access to them just yet. And so what we're seeing, though, is I want to show you the ones from last month, and we'll get an update on this as soon as they become available. But most of the plumes here, if we just take an average, are trying to bring this down here to have, in the middle of the Pacific, a sea surface temperature anomaly around negative 0.5 degrees Celsius. And that would be weak La Nina territory. So I'm going to watch this carefully to see if this is in fact the pattern that we are going to see establish itself as we move into fall. I just want to give you kind of a bit overview here as we start to discuss this over the next couple of weeks. Now, just for the fun of it here, I did want to show you what the models are forecasting for January at this point, and it is a highly amplified pattern. Now, I love snow, so when I see something like this, you kind of get a bit excited, because if we do end up producing a broad western trough here with a large ridge over the southeast, that storm track is going to run right through the midsection of the United States, giving us a lot of Colorado lows, probably some panhandle hookers, and really just screaming off to the northeast. And this is just one of those patterns where the midsection of the United States would get lit up. We'd have very cold, snowy conditions in parts of the Pacific Northwest, pack a lot of snow into those mountains. But this would be a jet stream pattern that would just crank. Now, remember, we're pretty far here in the forecast. I'm just going to put a disclaimer on this. This is for entertainment value only. So let's just remember that as we look forward into this longer range forecast. Okay, let's come back to reality here. Last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. Clearly, your eyes are drawn over to the east where Isaias went through parts of the Carolinas, went up to the northeast. Widespread wind damage. You've probably been seeing a lot of reports of that. As the deeper trough settled in here, bringing in some cooler weather, we did have scattered storms along the Ohio River Valley here that you can see stretching from southern Illinois through Ohio over the last 3 days. But then pulling over a ridge that's been developing out west, we have seen some big storms that have come through the high plains, and several of those storms producing some large hail. You can see them blowing up here in this satellite animation from yesterday, midday through sundown. A couple things I want to point out. The broader ridge that we do see developing over the southwest seems to be a robust feature, but we're going to continue to see a storm track dipping troughs into the northwest and then racing through the Canadian prairies. So this pattern we've been in, the cooler one, especially in the midsection of the country, is about to change. One thing we are continuing to see in the models here, along the east coast, stalled out frontal boundary here, plus plenty of moisture coming off the Atlantic and out of the Gulf. We're going to continue to see quite a bit of stormy weather here from Florida up through the mid-Atlantic. From there, why don't we go ahead and take a look at what this upper level pattern is going to be giving us. So what I want you to be watching for is our source region for a lot of our troughs are coming here out of Alaska, out of parts of the Arctic, and they slide down into the northwest and they keep pulling through parts of the Canadian prairies. We will see the better establishment of a ridge here. We've seen the models tend to give us that, which is going to allow for much of the eastern half of the country to heat back up after this cooler time period. But playing this forward, you can see those troughs. Look at it again as we work our way through the end of this week and weekend, coming through the northwest and then cutting into the Canadian prairies. So we're going to watch to the south of this for our frontal boundaries, which are going to initiate severe weather over the next few days. And then the storm track going through Canada is going to keep the weather unsettled there. As we work our way out to middle of next week, and then to the end of next week, and then finally to next weekend, so this would be the 16th of August, we still see the atmosphere favoring a ridge here, trough in the west, big ridge that's going to kind of establish itself around the four corner states, but we have to ask ourselves how much flow is going to come over this ridge northwest flow keeping it stormy down here across, well, parts of the Cornbelt getting into the southeast. We tend to see that pattern develop because as we go from day 10 out to day 15, there's that ridge that the models keep wanting to put into place. Now, I'm going to show you some differences in the models here in a few moments, and I actually am favoring more of the GFS, and I've seen the European trend toward the GFS as of late. But first, let's take a look at total accumulated precipitation through the next week. You can see the stormy pattern from Florida through the mid-Atlantic here, so we are expecting quite a bit more precipitation. And as those troughs come sweeping through the Canadian prairies, the frontal boundaries to their south are going to be bringing better chances for storms here over the coming days in parts of the Central Plains and Central and Western Cornbelt as well. Meanwhile, with the ridge establishing itself over the south and southwest, we see the monsoonal flow is still stunted, and Arizona having one of its hottest and driest summers on record. And it's only going to be hit or miss storms as you come through New Mexico into Texas and into parts of the high plains, similar to what we had been seeing as of late. So the probability over the next week of getting at least a ½ inch of rain is shown here. So take a look at the color bar at the bottom, and then you can start to match up those colors with your particular location. So this is the European ensemble picking up on the probability of getting at least a ½ inch of rainfall. So we're kind of just identifying where our main precipitation spots are going to be. Over the next 3 days, we're going to have storms again today across the high plains, and also the chance for some of the storms to be strong as we get over into North, South Carolina, and Virginia. But as the first wave ejects into the Canadian prairies and north central part of the United States tomorrow, we're going to keep a close eye here up in parts of southern Saskatchewan, southern Manitoba, getting into North Dakota, Minnesota, and also a little bit farther to the south there. On Saturday, we're going to once again watch this section of the Central Plains increase the risk of severe weather. And I'm concerned here in the Intermountain West over the next couple of days, we have some stronger winds in place, very dry conditions. Red flag warnings have been put out in that area as well. Meanwhile, just notice over the southeast, the winds midday, very stagnant. So that frontal boundary is just kind of sagging there, sitting. This is what's giving us those hit or miss storms rather than having a more organized system come through there. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Today on Thursday, higher pressure sits in this area, but remember the frontal boundary sagging to its south is what's going to keep showers and storms in through this particular part of the United States over here in the south and southeast. Playing this forward, let's go back here. This is now getting into this afternoon and this evening. Remember, we were going to be watching for some storms coming off parts of the high plains, could be moving into central Nebraska, but higher pressure still sitting here over parts of the Great Lakes. As we work our way into Friday morning and Friday or midday, we do see showers and storms that could be moving through parts of Missouri, Kansas, right here in parts of the Mid-South as well. And then as we go into the evening hours, that's when we're going to keep our eye here on the north central plains of the United States, getting into the Canadian prairies for strong to severe storms. But notice again, from Florida up through the Mid-Atlantic, getting up into parts of the Northeast, this area just popping with storms on that lingering frontal boundary that'll be sitting here. It's weak, very weak stationary boundary, but it's there. Fed on a lot of Gulf moisture, Atlantic moisture, we're going to see storms continue there once again. Look at this. This is now Saturday morning and afternoon, so we see it again. And that frontal boundary starts to push its way a little bit farther to the east. But watch what happens here as we get into Saturday afternoon and evening. We see our next cluster of thunderstorms kind of showing up here well in both models. The GFS and the European and the NAM are picking up on this particular feature coming through the Dakotas and Nebraska. So this is where our severe weather threat will be as we get into the evening hours on Saturday. Moving through the weekend, this is Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon and evening. We're going to watch the frontal boundary from that low that goes through the Canadian prairies move through the north central plains coming into parts of the Great Lakes states and Minnesota here. So then we see Monday morning, Monday afternoon and evening pushing on through. Now I'm going to just play the rest of the animation, and I want you to watch for the flashes of green across this section of the United States, and you're going to continue to see the pattern roll troughs through parts of the Canadian prairies. Those flashes you see here are just the result of plenty of moisture advection, the return of a larger ridge over the southeast, and some northwest flow. So that just gives us a stormier pattern in this area that the models are picking up on. Let me show you what I mean. I believe the GFS has actually a better representation of the amplitude of this pattern, bringing in a broader trough in the west. The ridge is established here, but the flow is going to come over this ridge in a direction like that. You see, the European has similar similar features. You can still see the trough here, although not clearly to the depth that the GFS does. And it broadens the ridge out a bit, but still brings that flow over in this direction while running the jet stream to the north of it. So that's why both models right now for week 2 have a relatively similar picture. The weaker southwestern monsoon, the drier conditions in through here, but remember, still popping storms on the heat of the day in this area. They're going to come flowing around that ridge. But you can just in general see the wetter conditions in both models sliding through this part of the Canadian prairies into the southeastern part of the United States. Could also mean stormier conditions for parts of the Pacific Northwest as well. So that's how our precipitation is playing out. As we transition over to talking about temperatures, I just want to give you an updated figure that I showed you about 2 weeks ago. It's the for corn growers across the United States. This is just a map that shows you how close we are to hitting that 2,500 GDU mark. And so everywhere that's in white, we've surpassed that number. But the percentages that you see labeled here, or the numbers, represent percentages. So just as an example, I'm right over here in Champaign. We're about 85% of the way to 2,500 GDUs. So you can just kind of pause the video and take a closer look at where you stand if you're curious how close you are to that particular number. So thinking about temperatures, let's now go over to our next 6 or 7 days here, looking at max temperatures and departure from normal. Another cool one here in the midsection of the country, cool along the west coast as well. I mean, to see upper 80s to low 90s in the Central Valley of California this time of year is not normal. Usually we got quite a bit of heat there. The heat's here under a pretty sharply defined ridge, but watch what happens as we play this forward. Getting ourselves into the day on Friday, the cooler weather starts to leave here in this section of the United States, and we see the broader ridge developing here over the weekend, such that by Sunday, widespread 90s across a broad sector here of the United States. Remember, though, those troughs are sweeping through the Canadian prairies, so we can see the reflection of that in Montana getting into North Dakota. Working our way now into Monday, another hot one, very humid into this area as well. So we're going to bring back on the humidity very quickly. And that persists into next Tuesday and Wednesday. Meanwhile, through this whole forecast, seeing the big heat return to the western United States doesn't seem to be in the cards here with the forecast models. Going out now to days 5 through 10, we see the pattern that we talked about really well established here in the temperature field as well. While the European has got a much broader swath here of above average temperatures, overall, through the 6 to 10 day time period, the models have a very similar pattern setting up. And that persists even out to the 11 to 15 day. Why the GFS is a bit cooler here, I think increased cloud cover and more thunderstorm activity. You can see that in the European as well, but the European just kind of painting a broader sector here of above average temperatures. Still, models I think are in decent agreement overall on this pattern moving forward. From here, what I'd like to finish up with is I want to give you just a quick update on the tropics. While over the next 5 days we're not watching much develop here, conditions are going to go back over due to the retreat of the MJO back over to phase 1 and 2 for more tropical activity. So as we look out to that 4 to 7 day time period, there's a few waves coming off of Africa to pay attention to. And we did see the overnight runs picking up on a better probability of some tropical disturbance development here in the 4 to 7 day time period. Just something I want to keep a close eye on because the tropics, as we anticipated earlier, to remain quite active. And the last thing I want to do is just talk quickly about Europe. We are expecting very, very hot conditions across parts of the Iberian Peninsula, stretching into France and Germany, and above average temperatures all the way over to the Black Sea. In terms of precipitation, you can see that throughout much of Europe, we're looking at a drier week, but we are anticipating storms to start popping here as the pattern begins to adjust. So we'll keep an eye on all of it and report back to you, but thanks for giving me another week of your attention here. I hope you'll have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.